Danny DeVito stood 4 feet 10 inches tall, and he was the most dangerous person in any room he entered. His version of the Penguin didn't just steal scenes in Batman Returns, it swallowed them whole. Here was a man who moved through Hollywood like a lit fuse, radiating a kind of energy that directors and studios genuinely didn't know how to handle. They could see the talent, they just couldn't figure out where to put it. But Danny always knew where he fit. He knew who he was when the cameras weren't rolling, when the contracts weren't on the table, when the applause had stopped. That kind of self-knowledge is rare in any industry, but in Hollywood, where identity gets bought and sold like a commodity, it's almost unheard of. What gave him that anchor wasn't the fame, and it certainly wasn't the money. It was a woman from Brooklyn. On a cold January night in 1971, she walked into a small theater without much expectation, probably just looking for a decent way to spend an evening. And then she saw the man on stage, and she couldn't look away. She wasn't watching a star yet. She was watching someone who was simply, completely, unavoidably alive in front of an audience. She chose Danny DeVito before the rest of the world had any idea he existed. Now, at 81 years old, Danny has finally put it into plain words himself. She was the love of his life, not one of them, the only one. And the road he took to arrive at that admission, through a childhood that came close to crushing him, through a Hollywood that tried to sand down every rough edge that made him interesting, and through a marriage that would eventually change shape in ways neither of them expected, is one of the most genuinely human stories the entertainment industry has ever quietly contained. Danny was born on November 17, 1944, in Neptune, New Jersey. From his first breath, the world seemed to be signaling that he wasn't exactly what it had ordered. His mother, Julia, was 40 years old when he came along, and she'd already moved through the exhausting work of raising several children before him. Another baby wasn't what she wanted. She admitted that later with a directness that must have been both painful and oddly clarifying to hear. "I didn't want him," she said, "but I'm so proud of him." 4 words of rejection and 6 words of love, sitting right next to each other like they belonged there. A child processing that sentence has to make a choice about which half to hold on to. Danny, it seems, held on to both of them. That contradiction became a kind of engine for him, a low hum beneath everything he ever built. That feeling of being unwanted, in the one place where a kid is supposed to feel most secure, doesn't just fade with time, it follows you. It shows up in audition rooms and on film sets, and in the way you respond when someone finally tells you that you're good enough. Danny felt it early, and he carried it forward. He didn't let it stop him, but he also never pretended it wasn't there. His father was a different kind of complicated. During the day, he ran a candy shop in Asbury Park, a neighborhood fixture, pleasant and well-regarded by the people around him. That version of his dad was easy to love, but evening brought a different man into the house. When the drinking started, the atmosphere changed in ways that young Danny learned to detect with the precision that kids in unstable homes develop out of sheer necessity. He read the signals. He knew when to disappear. Sometimes that meant a closet. Sometimes it meant a sprint to the neighbor's house. Between 1950 and 1955, police were called to the DeVito home at least 17 times. That number alone tells you something about the weight Danny was carrying long before he ever set foot on a stage. And he was carrying something else, too, something that never showed up in a police report. He was born with Fairbanks disease, a rare genetic condition that quietly shaped the physical reality of his entire life. It's the reason he never grew past 4 feet 10 inches, though the height itself was almost secondary to everything else the condition brought with it. Fairbanks disease targets the joints. His hips, his knees, his back, all of them under constant assault. By the time he was in his 20s, his baseline pain on any given day hovered somewhere between a 6 and an 8 out of 10 on the scale. That's not occasional discomfort. That's the kind of pain that becomes the background noise of your existence, the thing you manage and compensate for, and work around while the rest of your life continues. Danny worked around it every single day, on stage, on set, through takes and rehearsals, and all the unglamorous hours that don't make it into the highlight reels. The discipline that requires is something most people never have to develop, because most people are never asked to. What's remarkable, looking back at all of it, is not that Danny DeVito survived a hard beginning. Plenty of people survive hard beginnings and go on to live quiet, invisible lives. What's worth stopping to consider is what he did with all of it. The rejection and the chaos and the pain didn't hollow him out. They made him impossible to ignore. Hollywood had a simple rule back then: keep your vulnerabilities off the table. Weakness didn't sell tickets, and nobody in the studio system was going to make an exception for Danny DeVito. So he buried it. He showed up, he kept moving, and he said nothing. New York in those years was a city that humbled people fast. Danny landed in a $75 a month apartment he shared with a young actor named Michael Douglas, who hadn't yet mentioned to anyone that his father happened to be Kirk Douglas. There was no money for anything resembling comfort. They ate canned beans. They stretched their last $27 as far as it would go, spending it on headshots, then walking those photos across the city themselves, because there was no budget for anything else. Douglas started booking roles. Danny kept running into closed doors. To make rent, he parked cars. At one point, he stood completely still inside a clothing store window, pretending to be a mannequin, because that was the work that was available to him. For a stretch of time that he'd keep to himself for decades, he was sleeping in his old Volkswagen Beetle and using the showers at the YMCA to clean up. He told almost nobody. That kind of story doesn't fit the version of yourself you're trying to sell to casting directors. The pressure to change wasn't just implied, it was direct, and it came with money attached. One studio put an offer in front of him, worth the equivalent of nearly $1 million in today's money. The condition was surgery. They wanted his face reshaped, his presence softened, his whole appearance adjusted into something less unusual and more palatable for mainstream audiences. He turned it down. He didn't just decline politely and move on. He burned the contract at a beach bonfire. I'd rather be a first-rate version of myself than a second-rate version of someone else, he told the casting director who had been pushing him toward the table. That wasn't a performance. He meant every word of it. By 1970, Danny DeVito was 26 years old and carrying a history that most people his age hadn't come close to. He had been rejected more times than he could realistically track. His body caused him pain in ways that were difficult to explain to anyone who hadn't lived inside one like it. He had survived a childhood that would have quietly dismantled a lot of men before they ever made it to their first audition. And yet there he was, still in the city, still showing up, still refusing to become someone else's edited version of himself. What he hadn't had yet was someone who saw him without any of that framing. No context, no explanation, no backstory required. Just him, on a stage, and someone watching from a seat in the dark who couldn't look away. That moment arrived on the 17th of January, 1970. The show was called The Shrinking Bride. It was an off-Broadway production, modest in every sense of the word, the kind of show that doesn't get written into theater history books or remembered in anniversary retrospectives. Small venue, small run, one night that seemed on the surface like any other night in New York's sprawling, invisible theater scene. Rhea Perlman had come for one reason only: to support a friend who was in the cast. That was the whole plan for the evening. She was 22 at the time, raised in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, the daughter of a Polish immigrant father who worked in the toy business. She had studied drama seriously, earning her degree from Hunter College in 1968. Since then, real life had meant waitressing at the Rainbow Room in Rockefeller Center while fitting in auditions wherever she could find them. She was sharp and funny in the way that some people just naturally are, not performing it, not working for laughs, just genuinely quick and warm in a way that made rooms feel different when she was in them. She wasn't there that night to discover anyone. She sat down to watch her friend, And then something on that stage caught her attention and held it. There was a man up there who wasn't tall, who didn't carry the conventional features that got people cast as leading men, and who had absolutely no business commanding that room the way he was commanding it. And yet he was, completely, effortlessly, the kind of presence that makes you forget to check your watch, forget who else is on the stage, forget that you came to watch someone else entirely. Rhea Perlman sat in that seat and watched Danny DeVito, and something shifted. He had survived the rejection and the poverty and the pressure and the bonfire and the Volkswagen and every door that had been shut in his face. He had refused to be reshaped into something easier to sell. And now, on a modest stage in New York City on a cold January night, someone was finally seeing exactly who he was. Rhea Perlman didn't come to that show looking for anything. She had a seat. She had a reason to be there. And then Danny DeVito walked onto that stage and all of it went out the window. Something about the way he carried himself, the timing he had, the way a room just seemed to reorganize itself around him, made her completely lose the thread of why she'd shown up in the first place. By the time the curtain came down, she was asking around, did he have a girlfriend? He didn't. And that was all she needed to hear. She didn't wait for someone to make a formal introduction. That wasn't her style. I had to meet him immediately, she'd say years later, still laughing at herself when she said it. I came onto him big time. After the show wrapped, they went to dinner together, and what started as a night out stretched into hours. Two people sitting across a table, talking like they'd known each other for years. Think about what that dinner table looked like from Danny's side. Here was a man who had spent the better part of a decade being told he was wrong, too short, too rough around the edges, not quite what anybody was looking for. And sitting across from him was this woman from Brooklyn who thought he was the most riveting person she had ever watched perform. She wasn't just being polite, she meant it. He would say later that he knew within 22 minutes of meeting Rhea that she was the woman he wanted to spend his life with, not someone he was interested in, not a possibility worth exploring. The woman. Full stop. 2 weeks after that dinner, Rhea moved into his Manhattan apartment. Not a month later, not after a cautious courtship with careful steps and long conversations about what this all meant. 2 weeks. They looked at each other, recognized something they hadn't known they were missing, and didn't see any reason to drag it out. What connected them went deeper than the obvious things. Both of them came from working-class roots. Both of them knew what it felt like to want something badly and have no safety net underneath you if you missed. There was a specific kind of toughness that came from that shared experience, a way of moving through the world without expecting anything to be handed to you. When they found that in each other, it stuck. They'd go on to live together for 11 years before they ever got married, and that wasn't because either of them was unsure. The commitment was never in question. It was simply that neither of them needed a certificate to understand what they already had. Some people spend years chasing the feeling they walked into on the first night. While all of that was unfolding personally, something was quietly shifting on the professional side too. His friendship with Michael Douglas had held steady through the lean years, through all the small parts, and the long stretches of not quite breaking through. That relationship was about to pay off in a way that would change everything. In 1975, Douglas was no longer just an actor. He was producing, and his next project was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, adapted from Ken Kesey's novel and set to be directed by Milos Forman. He wanted Danny in the cast. Forman pushed back at first, and the studio had its own reservations. They were angling for a bigger name, someone the marquee would recognize. Douglas didn't budge. He'd seen what Danny could do, and he wasn't willing to trade that away for name recognition. Danny got the part of Martini, a psychiatric patient living inside the walls of an institution. What made the casting even stranger and more fitting was that Danny had actually played that same role years earlier in a stage version of the same story. He knew Martini. He'd already lived inside that character. His total screen time in the finished film came to 5 minutes and 52 seconds. That's it. Less than 6 minutes, across an entire feature. And yet people who watched that movie in 1975 still remember exactly what he did with those minutes, 50 years on. The film itself was a phenomenon, walking away with 5 Academy Awards. Danny wasn't nominated, and nobody pretended that was surprising given how little time he had on screen. But he was visible now, in a way he hadn't been before. The industry knew his name. Then he did something that genuinely baffled people. In 1978, with a little momentum finally behind him and a few movie roles on the table, Danny turned down 3 of them to go audition for a television sitcom. Hollywood thought he'd lost his mind. TV was where film careers went to stall out. His own agent told him not to do it, laid out the logic clearly, made the case. Danny listened, nodded, and went anyway. The show was called Taxi, and he'd read the script before he made the call. That was all it took. The same instinct that had told him about Rhea in 22 minutes told him about this in roughly the same amount of time. His gut said yes, without waiting for permission from anyone. The character he was going for was Louis De Palma, a cab dispatcher who was mean, petty, self-interested, and completely unapologetic about every single one of those qualities. He walked into the audition room and delivered a 7-minute monologue. When he finished, the room went quiet. ABC had real concerns about Danny's height. James L. Brooks, the show's creator, didn't just advocate for him. He told the network flat out that if Danny DeVito wasn't cast, he was walking. That kind of ultimatum carries weight. The network folded, and Danny got the part. What happened next says a lot about where his head was at the time. He signed the contract without any negotiation, even though his pay came in roughly 40% below what his fellow cast members were earning. He knew the number. He just didn't care. Getting the job was enough. Then the second season of Taxi arrived, and so did Rhea. She was brought in to play Zena Sherman, a girlfriend for Louis De Palma. The producers watched the 2 of them together on set and thought they were witnessing something rare. 2 performers with an almost uncanny natural chemistry. What they didn't know was that Danny and Rhea had already been sharing a life together for years. They'd been living under the same roof long before any casting call placed them in the same room. The chemistry the producers were marveling at wasn't a performance. It was 2 people who understood each other at a depth most people never reach with anyone. In January of 1982, after 11 years of building that kind of closeness, they got married. No spectacle, no production, just the 2 of them making it official. That same year, Rhea stepped into the role that would define a generation of American television. She joined the cast of Cheers as Carla Tortelli, the sharp, quick-tongued barmaid who said exactly what she thought and made you love her for it. She would go on to win 4 Emmy Awards for that performance, becoming one of the most genuinely adored actresses the medium has ever produced. Danny talked about Rhea's success the way a man does when the pride he's carrying is bigger than anything he's personally achieved. There was no performance in it. It was just real. And while Rhea was building that legacy on Cheers, the 2 of them were quietly building something else, entirely on the side. In 1983, working nights and weekends around their Taxi filming schedule, they co-founded Jersey Films. It didn't make much noise at first. But over the following 2 decades, it grew into one of the most consequential independent production companies American cinema had seen in a long time. The credits alone tell the story. Pulp Fiction, Erin Brockovich, Out of Sight, Garden State, projects that shaped what movies could look and feel like. The Pulp Fiction chapter deserves its own moment because it reveals exactly how Danny and his partners thought about their work. Quentin Tarantino had already been turned away by other studios when Jersey Films stepped in. They didn't just greenlight the project, they gave Tarantino's company actual money and office space and told him to go make his film. The budget was $8 million. Tarantino looked them in the eye and promised it would look like a $25 million movie. He kept his word, and they knew he would. All of this was happening while Danny and Rhea were raising 3 children at home. Lucy was born in 1983, Grace in 1985, and Jacob in 1987. The family didn't exist on the margins of their careers. It was woven through the center of everything. And the two of them held to a rule that said more about their marriage than most couples' vows ever could. No more than 2 weeks would pass without them working on something creative together. Not social appearances, not interviews, actual work, built side by side. Nothing illustrated that partnership more completely than Matilda in 1996. Danny directed it. He cast himself as the awful Mr. Wormwood and put Rhea in the role of his equally awful wife, and their own children showed up in small parts throughout the film. It was a family project in the most literal sense. But what audiences sitting in theaters that year never knew was what was unfolding behind the camera during production. The young actress playing Matilda was Mara Wilson. While the film was shooting, her mother was battling cancer. Danny and Rhea didn't treat that as someone else's private grief. They stepped in quietly, without announcement, and became a shelter for her. They cared for Mara the way you care for someone who already belongs to you. Before the production wrapped, Danny arranged for a near-final cut of the film to be screened at the hospital. He wanted Mara's mother to see it before she ran out of time. She did. Mara Wilson would speak about that years later, and what she said was simple and true. They had felt like her favorite aunt and uncle. They had taken something that was unbearable and made it slightly less so, and she had never forgotten it, and she never would. 30 years of marriage and more than 4 decades together, and still the world wasn't ready for the news that arrived in October of 2012. Danny DeVito and Rhea Perlman had separated. No scandal, no tabloid war, no dramatic public statement. Just two people stepping back from the life they had built. And somehow that quiet announcement hit harder than most Hollywood meltdowns ever could. People grieved it, genuinely, because Danny and Rhea hadn't just been a couple. They had been something closer to proof. Proof that two people from unglamorous backgrounds who met young and stayed true to each other through decades of fame and pressure and professional ambition could actually make it work. Every flashy, short-lived celebrity romance that had burned out and faded only made Danny and Rhea look more rare by comparison. When that separation was announced, it felt less like celebrity gossip and more like something quietly beautiful had gone dark. Rhea eventually opened up about the split, though she chose her words carefully. On Julia Louis-Dreyfus's podcast, Wiser Than Me, she was honest in the way that only someone who has processed real pain can be. "I'm not going to sugarcoat it," she said. "It was very difficult at first. There were a lot of reasons that we separated." She pointed to ambition, the particular strain of two driven people who both love their work deeply and fiercely. "He loves to work. I like to work," she said. Some things, she made clear, stayed between the two of them. There was no performance of grief, no blame distributed for public consumption. Just a woman telling the truth about something hard, and then drawing a line around what was still private. But here's what didn't happen. They didn't divorce. And that distinction matters more than it might seem at first. By March of 2013, barely 5 months after the announcement, a source close to both of them told People magazine something disarmingly simple. They love each other, always have and always will. They had reconciled. They went back to each other, and they went to work on it. Therapy, 38 sessions by some accounts. Danny even rented out the same restaurant where they had shared one of their early dates together, a gesture that says more about a person's character than any press release ever could. For 4 more years, they were together again. Then a second separation came, in 2017, and still they did not divorce. When a reporter from the New York Post asked Rhea in 2018 why they had never formally ended the marriage, her answer was completely unvarnished. "We've been together a very long time, so there's a lot of love and history," she said. "We agree on enough things, so why ruin that with the yucky things that come with a divorce?" There's a kind of wisdom in that answer that no romantic comedy ever quite manages to capture. Not everything has to end cleanly. Not every long love story fits the expected shapes. What they built in the years after that wasn't traditional, but it was unmistakably theirs. Danny bought a house less than a mile from Rhea's. They talked every single day. They kept a standing reservation at the same restaurant, the same table, regular as clockwork. Their son once observed that the two of them shared a Netflix account and would text each other in real time while watching the same shows from their separate houses. Think about that for a second. Two people living apart, deliberately staying close, still choosing each other's company, even across a screen. When Danny spoke to Fox News Digital in 2024, and someone brought up Rhea, he didn't hesitate for even a moment. "We're doing great," he said. "We see each other all the time. Yesterday was Lucy's birthday. We were all together for the party. We're a tight family." Then he added something that carries the real weight of the whole story. "You know, Rhea and I met in 1970. We've been together for that long, and you grow together, not apart, together." Rhea's own words give her away. "It's like you really know how each other's feeling all the time. We participate in conversation daily. Nobody talks about a former partner that way." That's the language of someone who never actually moved on. Someone for whom the love just changed shape but never disappeared. The connection between Rhea Perlman and Danny DeVito runs so deep that even their separation couldn't fully separate them. Back in May of 2019, when Rhea sat down on Watch What Happens Live, Andy Cohen put the question to her directly: would she and Danny ever divorce? She looked at him for a beat, like the question didn't quite compute, like he had asked her why she would bother putting out a candle that still had warmth in it. "What for?" she said. Two simple words, but they carried everything. Not bitterness, not grief, just a calm certainty that the question itself was missing the point entirely. And then in 2022, she went further, adding something that stopped a lot of listeners cold. "Sometimes I wish we were still together, because those were the glory days. But these are other kinds of glory days. Other kinds of glory days." That phrase deserves a moment. There is an entire philosophy of love buried inside it, if you're willing to sit with it long enough. She wasn't mourning what they had. She was saying what they have now is its own kind of something good. Then 2025 arrived, and Danny did something he had never quite allowed himself to do before. He began speaking openly about Fairbanks disease, the bone condition he's lived with his entire life. Not for personal publicity, not for sympathy, but for the children who couldn't afford the treatment they needed, for the adults grinding through daily pain with nobody in their corner and no one with a platform willing to say their name. What most people didn't know was that Danny had already been giving for years, quietly and without fanfare. More than $12 million funneled into bone condition research, none of it under his own name, none of it tied to a press release or a photo opportunity. He cared more about the result than the recognition. That's a rare thing. And now he was adding his voice to what his money had already been doing for years. He also started speaking honestly about something else, the decades of pressure he faced from Hollywood to conform to a more physically typical look. Studios had nudged, suggested, sometimes pushed him toward procedures that might make him easier for mainstream audiences to accept. Every time, his answer was the same: "I'd rather be a first-rate version of myself than a second-rate version of someone else." He said that in his 20s, when he was broke and sleeping in a Volkswagen, he was still saying it at 81. The man did not drift from himself, not once. And when you pull back and look at the whole shape of his life, a thread becomes visible. It connects every chapter. The burned contract with a producer who tried to take advantage of him. The 19 takes on a water slide with broken blood vessels in his eye. The $12 million given anonymously to people he would never meet. And at the center of that thread is a woman who walked into a theater on a January night, forgot entirely about the friend she had come to see, and fixed her eyes on the stocky man holding the stage and couldn't pull them away. Rhea Perlman saw Danny DeVito before credentials existed. She chose him when the world was still deciding he was the wrong shape, and the wrong height and the wrong everything for the kind of frame Hollywood had in mind. She said it herself, always with a laugh. She came onto him big time. She moved into his apartment 2 weeks after they met, and in every way that actually counts, she never left. At 81, Danny DeVito is still moving. He's producing a sports documentary series for Prime Video, alongside his son Jake and his daughter Lucy, turning family into a creative partnership just as naturally as he does everything else. He's still playing Frank Reynolds on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, a show he joined in 2006 when it was still finding its footing, a show he helped anchor, a show he has never walked away from. The man who was told he didn't fit the frame has been filling it on his own terms for 6 decades. He showed up for her when it counted, and then he just kept showing up. That seems to be the quiet constant running through Danny DeVito's entire life. Not the fame, not the roles, not the contracts he tore up, but this, the willingness to stay. He and Rhea still talk every single day. They still hold the same table at the same restaurant. And despite the separation that made headlines, they remain husband and wife, legally, and in every way that appears to matter to either of them. No divorce was ever filed, no final door was ever closed. When someone asked Danny what Rhea had meant to his life, he didn't reach for a speech. He didn't offer a grand romantic gesture dressed up in words. He just said what was true. We have 3 beautiful children, and now we have grandchildren. The family's growing. We participate in conversation daily. That's it. No poetry, no sweeping declaration rehearsed for an audience. Just a man, at 81, quietly describing the texture of his daily life with the person he has known longer than anyone else on earth. Plain language, honest language. The kind that doesn't need dressing up because it's already carrying everything it needs to carry. And maybe that plainness is the point. Danny DeVito spent decades being told he didn't fit, that he was too short, too unconventional, too much of something and not enough of something else. He heard it from casting agents, from studio executives, from every gatekeeper who looked at him and saw a liability instead of a talent. He refused every version of himself they tried to hand him. He burned contracts rather than betray the work. He showed up sick and said nothing about it. He gave money, time, and loyalty without once asking for recognition in return. And through all of it, Rhea was there. The woman who walked into a theater in 1970 looked at this man that most people would have overlooked and decided he was the most interesting person in the room. She saw something that the industry spent years trying to convince everyone wasn't there, and she never changed her mind. They don't share the same house anymore. That part of the story shifted, but the daily phone calls didn't stop. The restaurant table didn't change. The family they built together, 3 children, a growing roster of grandchildren, a shared history that stretches back more than half a century, none of that dissolved just because their living arrangement did. Some bonds don't operate on the terms the outside world expects them to. There's something worth sitting with in that. The idea that a relationship can change its shape and still hold its meaning. That 2 people can love each other past the point where conventional labels stop applying. That staying, even in a form the world might not immediately recognize as love, can sometimes be the most honest and enduring thing 2 people ever do for one another. Danny DeVito met Rhea Perlman on the 17th of January 1970. He has never really stopped finding her since. And in a business that chews through people and spits them out, in a culture that treats love like a product with an expiration date, that might be the most quietly radical thing about him. Not the Emmy, not the Oscar nomination, not the decades of work that outlasted trends and survived every prediction that he'd fade. The fact that the boy from Asbury Park who wasn't supposed to make it found his person early, held on in every way that mattered, and at 81 is still picking up the phone every single day. That's the story, and it's a good one. If you want more deep dives into the lives behind the Hollywood legend, the real stories that didn't make the publicity rounds, hit subscribe and come along for the next one. We've got plenty more where this came from. See you in the next one.